sure the audio is working. Test. Test. Yep, that's working. That's great. So last time we left off with the last type of leadership that we were talking about, which is caring leadership. Now, again, what you can find is that a lot of these categories we think of as being distinct and separate, but they oftentimes will have elements of other leadership styles. So caring leadership can also, have a paternalistic leadership aspect to it, but in general, the focus is on looking at the needs of the people that you are leading and taking that into consideration. And so one of the things that we think about when we think about leadership and ethics is, again, how did the leader come to be the leader, and what kind of organization and culture are we building, and what kind of organization and culture do we want to support and sustain? So how do we do that with our leadership and our values? How do we build a values-based culture? Well, again, it starts with things like mission statements. What is it that we are going to do as an organization? What is the mission statement, for example, of the University of Central Oklahoma, do you think? What do you think the mission statement of an institution of higher education should be?
Is it like to learn, to lead, something?
I think that's maybe our tagline. Like we used to have three, what was it, that President Webb had, which was, I've gone blank. This should come tripping off my tongue, but so I think it's got to be something along the lines of providing a quality education that serves the greater needs of our community in the state of Oklahoma. Something along those lines, right? Would not be surprising to find as the mission statement of the University of Central Oklahoma. So that's important. Looking at these mission statements is important in terms of determining what it is that we're going to do, and then how we're going to deliver on those kinds of things in an ethical standpoint, from an ethical standpoint. What is it that we want to deliver in terms of the value that we add not only to you, but to the state of Oklahoma as a whole, right? So we started out the semester and I was talking about things like, with regard to ideas of fairness is one of the things that we said was maybe a critical component of ethics. A lot of people come up with this idea that's fairness. Well, what is fair? Is it equality of results or equality of opportunity? One of the things that I think we have to think about here is equality of opportunity, because if we focus on equality of results, are we putting out a product, you, for example, and your knowledge base that is useful and going to get you skills and jobs and things like that? Or are we just a degree mill? And I think we want to avoid being a degree mill, because if you do that, you have brand dilution and diminution, and you're not producing something that is overall beneficial to the state of Oklahoma and the citizens that support this institution, right? So we also have codes of ethics. Now, a lot of these codes of ethics are going to be dependent not just on the organization, but so for example, we have, sort of a code of ethics that we follow. It's called the Faculty Conduct Policy here at UCO, and it's a fairly detailed policy that says things like, I should treat you with respect and dignity, and I should evaluate you on the quality of the work and not based on sort of arbitrary and capricious factors. But I'm also governed by a rather thick and long code called the Rules of Professional Responsibility for Lawyers, right? And this is a rather thick document that is promulgated by the state bar, largely based on the model code by the American Bar Association. And that becomes important. And then also statements of values. And again, one of the things that we have to think about when we promulgate these and we decide that we're going to follow these is not just putting them on a plaque somewhere, but actually watching and implementing those. Now, the state bar, for example, does a really good job of this, in my opinion, in recent history. It used to be that a lot of people didn't think that we did a very good job as lawyers of policing ourselves because there was sort of a idea that maybe the lawyers were engaging in protectionism. But I can tell you, I think that the bar in Oklahoma takes very seriously the idea that the legal profession is a learned profession, and it is one that we have to monitor and police vigorously so that we are good providers and good stewards of the public's trust as officers of the court. And so they have, an entire investigative team that monitors compliance with the codes of ethics. Businesses, oftentimes can't take the same steps because they don't have the same kind of resources. The bar is not a for-profit organization, right? It's funded by the membership of the bar, but it's not for profit. And so they can spend money on these things. It's much more difficult in a for-profit organization that has to think about the bottom line. And that can lead to problems and conflicts that are hard to deal with because the corporation is more interested in obviously making money. So how do we do that in a public or in a private corporation setting? Well, and these are required by various federal laws, as we've had corporate scandals, for publicly traded organizations. Now, the vast majority of businesses in this country are not publicly traded, but for those that are, you have to have things like ethics hotlines. Now, one of the things that is problematic about ethics hotlines is that, and particularly for public organizations like the University of Central Oklahoma, we have an ethics hotline. And you can use that ethics hotline, but you also have to temper that and balance it with the idea that you have to have respect for the sort of integrity of employees' rights as well. So you can call the ethics hotline and you can file an ethics point. And one of the things that they have to think about is that, particularly if you're talking about a tenured faculty member who has due process rights, how you balance that. In this country, if we think about the criminal justice system, for example, we don't have star chamber proceedings, right? What does that mean? What's a star chamber? Well, it's where you basically have a presumption of guilt, and it's up to the defendant to prove themselves innocent, and you disappear people in countries that don't have a full and robust idea of due process. Now, at the criminal justice level, this is really important because in a free and open and democratic society, we want to make sure that you are not risking individuals' liberty in a slipshod manner. Well, what does that mean? And why, if we apply the analogy to ethics hot points, can this be problematic? When you file an ethics hot point, for example, with the Board of Regents of Oklahoma colleges, it's anonymous. What's wrong with that?
Harder to cooperate.
Well, corroborate, not cooperate, I think is what you mean, right? It's difficult. One of the things, if we think about it in terms of the criminal justice system, we don't allow for anonymous witness testimony. If you accuse somebody in court of a crime, if the state accuses you of a crime, they have to present their witnesses against you in open court so that you can cross-examine those witnesses. That seems fair, doesn't it? In an ethics hot point, they don't have to provide their name. This can present ethical challenges. When I was associate general counsel, we would have students that would get mad at professors and they would file these ethics hot points. against, and we had an obligation to investigate that. And it was really hard because we don't know who filed the charge. And you have these professors that have a property interest in their jobs. Now, in the private sector, you don't have a property interest in your jobs. We operate with an employment at will, and we'll talk about that in a minute, this employment at will doctrine. And that's okay. And one of the things that is nice about that is that it gives management supreme flexibility. The problem is that particularly in a market in which you need employees and you can get rid of any employee, the issue is what's the cost of doing that? And so you have this very delicate balancing act. Sarbanes-Oxley mandated that you had to have corporate ethics officers. Now, who is that officer going to be? A lot of people wanted to just make the lawyer. They're like, well, you've got this fairly sophisticated code of ethics and legal profession, we'll just make the lawyer. The problem with doing that is that lawyers are there to protect the company, not necessarily make sure that everything is ethically compliant. Their job and their duty is to protect the company. And then finally, having a holistic integration of this. So it involves training and HR and, a constant reinforcement of these kinds of ideas and a perpetual continuous improvement plan to make sure that this kind of thing is happening in our organizations. Again, businesses oftentimes think that this is a huge cost center, but I would submit to you that particularly in an age in which everything can be so public, you might want to think about this and the advantages of doing this, because your generation in particular, one of the things that we know about is that you all want to deal with companies that you view as being ethical and ethically sensitive. And if you think that people can't find out about your business practices in this day and age, they can. When I started teaching marketing years and years and years ago, and I was not a marketer, I taught a hybrid course. And that's how I got interested in marketing, was I taught a course called political marketing. And it was combined between, I was in the Department of Political Science at the time, and we had a marketing faculty member who taught it with me, who did the kind of the marketing side of it, and I did the political theory side of it. So, the sort of nuts and bolts about how you actually go about running for an election. So I told you all that I'm an elected official in Guthrie, right? My mother was an elected official before me, and this is my second time serving on the city council. Before I was 25 when I got elected the first time. So the part that I would do in this would be talking about things like, how is it that you actually get on the ballot? If you want to be a politician, and nobody says they want to be a politician, which is probably, telling, but also maybe a bad thing, because people say things like, I'm not a politician, I know dog about and then they get elected to office and we find out that, they don't understand that government doesn't work the way business does, right? So I would focus on things like, how is it that you actually go about, for example, if you want to run for president, getting on the ballot. If you want to run for president, you're going to have to get on the ballot in all 50 states. That's different in all 50 states, right? In Oklahoma, how do you get on the ballot? There are two ways that you get on the ballot in Oklahoma. What are those two ways? Anybody know?
Write-ins.
No, that is not how you get on the ballot. You can't do write-ins in Oklahoma. Why not? How do we vote? Any of you vote in Oklahoma? How many of you voted in Oklahoma? How do you vote? You give you a paper, but you can't write in on that paper because it goes through a machine, an optical reader, right? So there's no write-ins in Oklahoma. So how do you get on the ballot in Oklahoma? Two ways. No. Good guesses, but no. You can either pay to be on the ballot, or you can get signatures. You go get enough signatures of qualified electors and you can get on the ballot. The way you get enough signatures is it's based on the last general election numbers. And it's a percentage of those numbers, right? Or a set number. I think for example, in Guthrie, to be on the Guthrie City Council ballot, you either have to pay a filing fee of $50, or I think you have to get signatures equal to 10% of the last municipal general election in your ward, or if you're running for mayor for the city as a whole. Don't hold me to those numbers because I haven't looked at them, but that's the way you get on the ballot. There's two ways. You either go out and get enough signatures, or you pay a big enough filing fee to do that. And every state has different ways of getting on the ballot in those states. Some states, for example, have, instead of primaries, we have primaries in Oklahoma. So if you're running for a partisan office, which would be things like congressman, state representative, state senator, United States senator, governor, president of the United States, you run on a partisan ballot, so you have to get on the primaries. Some states don't do primaries, they do caucuses. There are very few states that do that anymore. I think Iowa may be the only one left that does that. So how do you get on the caucuses? Well, you actually have to have people in Iowa show up and advocate for you. Like they actually, they go into a meeting and they actually caucus, and people will talk about which candidate they want in the primaries, and that's how you go advance to the general election in Iowa. So it's, sort of having a holistic integration of these ideas. Again, when I started teaching marketing and I taught political marketing at the beginning, we would focus in on a lot of the mechanics of the formalities that are involved. And when we talk about translating that into the private sector, you don't necessarily have all of these formalistic processes that you have in the public sector that provide for these kinds of things of due process. So you have to think about, how are you going to integrate that? And should we have things like workplace democracy, which then brings us to my discussion of today, which is jobs and having an ethical job and what we want in terms of the meaning and value of work. So, anybody know who Pat Tillman is? This is a rather old example, but I like this example. You're shaking your head yes. Who was Pat Tillman? He was a football player. He was a fairly decent football player. He had a pretty good contract at the time that he decided to give it all up and do what? Do you remember?
Go to the army?
He went into the army. Yeah. And it was right after 9/11. A lot of people decided they were going to do this. I had probably 10 students the semester that 9/11 happened. And I remember 9/11. Most of you are too young to remember this. But I was teaching that morning and I had a 7 a.m. class. That's when we actually had students that would show up at 7 a.m. to come to class. And we were running out of space in the liberal arts. Again, I was a political scientist at the time, not a marketer. And I had an American National Government class, and we'd run out of space in the College of Liberal Arts for our classes. So we were holding some of our classes in the communication building, which is the building directly to the west here. And I was in one of the auditoriums there. So I taught one of the big lecture series, and I walked in that morning, and because it was in the communication building and not in the liberal arts building, they have all of these television monitors out because they have the UCO, right? They teach television production and stuff like that. So they had all of the news stations on. And I remember walking into that class and watching the first plane hit the World Trade Center. I was walking in and I just caught my eye. And I walked into class and I said, I think something more important happened than anything that we're going to talk about in this class today. You need to, and shortly thereafter, they closed. The airways, they closed down, the airspace in the United States, colleges, schools, everybody let out and everybody went home. And that had a profound impact. There are these moments in history that everybody remembers. For my mother's generation, that was the Kennedy assassination. Everybody knew where they were. It was imprinted on their mind. And 9/11 is certainly one of those deals that is one of those things where I remember the day like it was yesterday. Another event that happened when I was pretty young, but I was working for an attorney. I was not an attorney yet. I was working for an attorney who was doing bankruptcies. And the morning of the Murrah bombing, we were supposed to be down there. We were running late. We had to meet the client to get the pages signed for a bankruptcy. And we were going to be down there filing in federal court. The bankruptcy court is right behind the US district courts and the old post office. And we were going to be down there that morning. And if it hadn't have been for the fact that we were running late, we would have been down there in the bombing. That's another one of those events that is emblazoned on my memory, because I remember exactly where I was when it happened and what was going on. And I didn't know anybody in Oklahoma who didn't know somebody who was impacted by that event. And so Pat Tillman gives up this incredible contract as a result of this profound event and goes into the Army. And not as an officer. He went in as an enlisted person. Why would you do that? And then what happens? Do you remember what happened to him? Yeah.
He got killed in a
He got killed. Yeah. He got fairly, I mean, he wasn't in that long. And he was killed. Why would you give up this incredible career? Like, almost nobody makes it to the NFL. I have lots of friends who, in high school had dreams of playing professional basketball, football, baseball. My brother was like the only American on the OSU tennis team. And he wasn't good enough. That's pretty elite. And he wasn't good enough to go pro. It's a minuscule percentage. It's a minuscule percentage of people that play high school sports that go on to college at any level. Tiny percentage. Why would you give that up to go into the Army? That's a huge pay cut, right? You're talking about millions of dollars in contract to, at that time, I don't know what they were paying enlisted people in the military, but it was under $100,000. Way under $100,000. Why would anybody do that? Obviously, work is not just about money. In fact, every survey of why people go into the jobs that they go into, money is, except for one category, money is way down on the list of motivation. I would submit to you that if you wanted to make a lot of money, there are lots of jobs. Like, why are you sitting in this classroom at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday when you would probably rather be doing something else? Well, it's because you probably want to have a meaningful job at some point in time. If you were just motivated by money, now the exception to that is salespeople, by the way. So we have a professional sales program here at UCO. It is the only program we have the only program that on campus can say we have 100% placement of our majors and minors, and 80% of our majors make over 6 figures in their first year. Only program that can say that. Nursing can say they have 100% placement. They don't make $100,000. Now they'll get close. If you are a nurse and you work the differentials, you can get close. And for salespeople, the number one motivator is money. But that's an exception. Everybody else says that they're motivated by other things first. Money's important. And again, I would submit to you that if you were really motivated by money, go do something else. Get a sales degree, all right? So I'll tell you, like, get our sales degree, because I can guarantee that you're gonna make a lot of money if you're good at this. Now, not everybody can sell. I mean, everybody's gonna have to sell something. You're gonna have to sell yourself to get a job. So everybody sells something, but most people, like, one of the things that we hear overwhelmingly from people is, I want to get a business degree, but I don't want to be in sales. 90% of everybody's first job is in what? Sales. At some level, right? So people who get these degrees in finance, they think they're going to be coming up with, fantastic financial models. You're going to be selling services, probably. That's what you, as an FA, that's what you're going to be doing, is selling. So, get a job in sales. But most people say that they want something else. Obviously, Pat Tillman was motivated by something other than money. Because if it was just money, he would have stayed in the NFL. He obviously was motivated by this enormous sense of patriotism after our country was attacked in the largest terrorist attack on American soil up to that point. So what are some of the common assumptions about work? Well, there are 20th century views, which a lot of times have a tendency to be fairly pejorative towards work. In the 21st century, we're seeing this evolving and changing as we have more people that are engaging in what we call contingent work. A lot of people are perfectly happy with not necessarily going to work. Historically speaking, if you went back in time, the way people worked was you went to work for a company and you stayed with that company for a long period of time. My grandparents, if you went back to my grandparents' era, they went to work for somebody and they stayed with that company. I am really unusual in that I have been here since I was in my 20s. I have worked for this institution since I was in my 20s. Most of you will not say that. You will go to work for multiple different companies. You'll probably switch careers in your lifetime, but that was really unusual. I remember my stepfather's mother came for a visit one time early on, and I don't remember why I have this memory, because my mom married my stepdad when I was fairly young, and this was fairly early in their relationship, that his mother came and visited them. And this is what she said about my stepdad. And my stepdad was an FBI agent. He was a special agent in charge of the Santa Fe field office of the FBI. And my mother's impression and my impression of my stepdad was that this guy was rock solid. I mean, he was just to go into the bureau. When he went into the bureau, it was an extensive background check. Everybody had to meet the director of the FBI. When he went into the FBI, that was J. Edgar Hoover, by the way. And, there was all of these things. You couldn't have been seen by a psychiatrist or psychologist ever and get into the FBI. That was an a priori bar, because if you'd ever been seen, now the FBI was going to have you see a psychiatrist there because they wanted to make sure that you weren't crazy, right? But if you'd ever gone and seen one, that was no, none of that. Not any of that, because that was a sign that you're crazy, right? We understand a lot more about mental health now than they did at that point in time. But so our impression was that, this guy was like really, really rock solid. My step grandmother's impression was that my stepfather was shiftless, in her words. And this is why. She said, so my stepdad, his father was a coal miner, and he worked his way up. He worked a semester in the coal mines and then went to college for a semester. He was the first member of his family to go to college. His family immigrated here from Italy. They worked in the coal mines, and he was the first one to go and get a college degree. And he did that by working a semester in the coal mines to save up enough money and then going to college for a semester. And my step grandmother said, she said to my mother, I remember this conversation like it was yesterday. She said, Jimmy was the first in our family to go get a college degree, and we were really proud of him. And he got a job as a teacher, and that was a really good job. They thought that was like a fantastic job, because if your husband had been a coal miner, which is one of the dirtiest, hardest jobs on the planet at the time, you know, to have a job where you're inside and it's, you know, got climate control, that was a really, she thought that was a really good job. And she said, and you know, he quit that job. We couldn't believe he quit that job. And he went and got a master's degree and he went to work for Anaconda Corporation as a chemical engineer. And that was a really good job. And then he quit that job. He got a PhD in chemical engineering and he went into the bureau and she's like, and now he's got an even better job. And we just hope he can keep that job. Her opinion was that if you didn't go to work for a company and stay with them forever, you were, you know, like you were adrift. How many jobs do you think you'll have in your lifetime? Statistics say you'll have 7 or more. Most of you will change career fields over the course of your lifetime. You may start out in one thing and do something completely different. Lots of people go to school, they get degrees, and then they don't use those degrees. Musical theater would be a prime example. I feel so sorry for those people. I'm gonna hang that degree on the barista stand. That was the way people worked back then. You went to work for a company, and my grandparents did this. They were part of the Manhattan Project. They went to work for the Department of Energy and they stayed until retirement in this program that built the bomb. So that's not the way. I mean, I'm really unusual in that I've had this job here at UCO. Now I've changed departments and I've gone from administration to full-time faculty, but basically I've had one job for most of my career here. And even when I was in another department, a big portion of my job was still teaching, even though I had an administrative component to it. So that's really unusual. So as we find more and more people that are engaging in contingent work, you know, that are doing jobs for short periods of time, and when we have corporate downsizing, what we're saying is that there's not so much stability in the workforce. So what is it that provides meaning in work? Well, in Habits of the Heart, the authors, Bella and his co-authors, come up with 3 kinds of levels. And I think we've touched on this before. I talked a little bit about this in a previous class. The first time I was on city council, we actually employed the garbage men in the city of Guthrie. Most cities at that point in time, this was before 2000. So I actually was vice mayor during Y2K. You all don't remember this, but it was a big deal. Everybody was like worried that the world was going to shut down. Our city manager was like, well, I need you to be with me at City Hall and the police department in case our water system fails. I'm like, why would our water system fail? And he's like, I don't know. What? And I'm like, we literally have no automation. I'm like, our water system is like opening valves, you know, throwing in the chemical. It wasn't that primitive, but literally like there was nothing automated. And I'm like, don't think we have to worry about the water supply. But there was all this like, the planes are gonna fall out of the sky, you know, at 12:01 on, you know, January 1st, 2000. So we actually employed the garbage men at that point in time, and I think I told you this before. One of them was my constituent. He lived in my ward. He was a happy guy, by and large, but he didn't define himself. If you talk to him, which I did, I knew him. I mean, you live in Guthrie, you live in a small town, you know people. My nephew's always surprised when we go to Walmart, like how many people we'll run into that will like stand there and talk to me. And, you know, I run into, I mean, I cannot go to Walmart and have it be a 15-minute deal because I will run into people and they'll like, I've already got people texting me today because they want to put a trailer park in Guthrie and there's like all this uproar and people are like, you know, wanting to talk to me about it. You know, I talked to this guy quite a bit. And if you asked him, you know, he didn't define himself, by the job that he did. It was just transactional. It was just a way to make a living. And that's a job. There is very little connection between the identity of the individual and the work that they perform. Nothing wrong with that. You know, lots of people in the post-industrial world are earning their living. I mean, it used to be in the early days of Uber, when I first started taking Ubers, most of the Uber drivers that I met were doing this to earn some extra money on the side. You know, they had other jobs. And then when COVID hit, a lot of them lost jobs, and people are now doing Uber full-time and DoorDash. I don't know anybody who really thought that this was what they wanted to do for a living. It was just sort of what happened to them. I always talk to the Uber drivers because I take a lot of Ubers when I go to Dallas, at least. I have a car once I get to my brother's house, but from the airport to my brother's house, I always take an Uber because my brother's lazy and he won't come get me. Even the airport is literally like 10 minutes from his house that I fly. I mean, he's just very lazy. So I take Ubers a lot from the airport to my brother's house. And then once I get there, I have a car. We just don't leave the car at the airport because it's just, you know, like a sitting target out there. So I talk to these Uber drivers. I talk to all of them. I have a 5-star rating on Uber. Very proud of that. And it's for 2 reasons. A, I tip well, and I tip in cash. I always give them $20 from the airport to my brother's house and $20 the other way. And I'll talk to them. And I'll, you know, like, I've never met anybody who's like, this is the greatest job on the planet. I just love Uber. You know, as a child, I yearned to be an Uber driver. No. Right? So that's a job. The next level is a career, and that's what most of you want. There is a very close connection between your identity and the task that you perform. And that's why you're here. Most of you want a career. And that's what we get into when we say that the vast majority of surveys show that people want something more than just money. They want work that provides them with some meaning in their lives. And that's what most of you want. So there's a close connection between the activity that's performed and the self. Maybe it's not all consuming, but that's, you know, I mean, when you go to fashionable parties, which there are becoming fewer and fewer of these because we just don't do that anymore. No, first of all, nobody wants to dress up anymore. So it's kind of amazing to me. Again, when I was a younger person and I would go out, you know, on when I was 21, and you'd go out to the clubs, people actually like dressed up. I went out to like a bar the other day with my family. My sister-in-law wanted to go out and country and western dance. And like, if you went to a country bar when I was a kid growing up, people dressed like you wore starched Wranglers and you polished your boots and you wore a pressed shirt. There were people there in I swear they were in their pajamas. And, you know, I mean, you go to a fashionable party and when you meet people, what's the first thing that they're going to ask you? Or one of the first things that they're going to ask you after, like, you know, what's your name? They're going to ask you, what do you do for a living? I don't ask that question. And the reason they ask you that question is not because they care about you. The reason people ask that question is A, it instantly allows them to peg you on the social ladder, like where you are, right? And B, it also provides them an opportunity to talk about what they do. And most people want to talk about themselves. It's why you should like job interviews. It's the only time in your life. I go on job interviews every year. I love going on job interviews because it's the only time in your life that people actually want to talk about you. You should really practice going on job interviews. A, it allows you to practice the selling skill that everybody's gonna have to sell something, they're gonna have to sell themselves. And it's probably the only time in your life, other than your mommy asking you how you're doing, that people actually care about you. They're actually interested in you. Right? So people ask you, what do you do for a living? And there's some prestige in saying, I'm a lawyer. There's some prestige in that. The highest level of work is a calling. In a calling, there is no differentiation between the activity that's performed and the self. Now, as a lawyer, I don't know that most of my brethren feel this way, but I really do feel this way about the legal profession. It is a brethren. I told you all before that if everybody who goes to law school has the same experience, the legal education is so regimented that everybody goes through sort of at least the first year and a half of the same thing. You all take the same classes. Everybody takes contracts, torts, constitutional law, legal research and writing in their first semester. That's everybody takes the same thing. And there are these archetypes of professors, and everybody has these same experiences. So it really creates a lot of cohesion. If you are a lawyer, when you talk to other lawyers generally like each other because we've all had this really miserable experience that we all went through, which is called law school. And then that is followed. You don't even get to enjoy. If you go to law school, you don't even, when you graduate, and when I graduated from law school, I thought that was it for me. I thought my academic career was over. I had 2 bachelor's and masters, and then I got my Juris Doctorate. And I thought that was the end of my academic career. I never thought I would go get a PhD after that. I thought this is it. And you don't get to enjoy that. Like, I literally graduated from law school on a Friday, and on Saturday morning, you start prepping for the bar. Like, literally, you literally go to class the day after. You start going to classes and preparing for the bar because you don't want to take this thing twice. Trust me. So everybody takes the bar prep. If you're going to spend that amount of money and going to law school and that amount of time and effort, you need to take the bar prep because you need to pass this, and you want to pass on the first time because it's a miserable experience. My brother had to take it twice because my favorite phrase in the English language is "I told you so." And when he passed the New York bar, he instantly went inactive. And I said, "You don't want to do that." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because when you no longer work for Goldman Sachs and you're no longer in New York, you're going to want reciprocity because you're never going to want to take another bar exam ever again." And he did not listen to me. What he said was, "I will always work for Goldman and I'm never leaving New York." And then he got a divorce and he needed help with his children, and he moved back to the Southwest so that his mother and I could help take care of his little kids because he still worked for Goldman. And then he quit working for Goldman. And guess what he had to do? Take another bar exam. Because if you go inactive, you haven't been active for the last 5, and there's no reciprocity. So you had to take the Texas bar exam again. Miserable experience, right? So you don't want to do this. So because of this experience, I really view being a lawyer. I am a lawyer 365 days a year. I am always subject to the rules of professional responsibility. I can't ever escape that unless I give up my license to practice law. I am held to a higher standard than you because at any moment, and you don't have to be my client to file a bar complaint against me. You can you can say, I treated you unfairly and I acted in an unlawyerly. Now, whether or not that complaint is going to be taken really seriously is another matter, right? It's going to be taken a lot more seriously if you're my client, but I'm always subject to those rules. And so I don't view being a lawyer as being a career for me. It's a calling. I view it as a brotherhood, as a brethren. And people who've gone through this, like I said, I like most lawyers. Even if I'm opposing them, after our case is over, we usually get together and, we become friends because we've gone through this experience that is so miserable. I think I told you all that, law school, the first day of law school, Mr. Aguirre, Marbury versus Madison. And if you can't stand up and brief that case, leave. Literally, 15 people were told to leave the first day of class because they were unprepared. So I view it as a calling. There is no differentiation. But most people are not going to get to this point. Most people want a career. And how do we make those careers meaningful and beneficial and ethical? So what is the value of work? Well, obviously, at a very low level, it's the instrumental value that you get from work. We all have to earn a living. Most of us, I'm going to submit, if you're in this class, probably no one in here is independently wealthy and just taking this class for the sake of taking it. I think I told you all before that the first secularly funded university in the world was started by Thomas Jefferson. It's called the University of Virginia. And his idea was that he wanted to hire the finest scholars from around the world, bring them in, and allow people to come and become educated. You went to college and you know, he didn't necessarily want it to be a degree granting institution. He wanted you to come, listen to the lectures, and leave when you feel educated. And I asked students how many of you would do that. And from time to time, I'll have a student who's bright enough to raise their hand and say, I'll do it. Because they kind of figure that, you know, I'm an academic and maybe I liked this, you know. And so, you know, they're, oh yeah, I would do that. No, most of you would not do it. If you weren't getting a piece of paper at the end of this process that says you're educated, you wouldn't do that, right? So you want something, and because we're not all independently wealthy, we're probably going to have to work for wages. So that's going to be part of the consideration. And then also the benefits that come along with that are important. It's not just the actual amount of salary, right? You're probably going to look at other things as well, like, do they provide health insurance? That's a big thing in this country. The number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is what? Anybody know? Medical costs. That's it. The number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is people who cannot pay their medical bills because it's expensive. If you go to the hospital for any reason, it's thousands of dollars. I had a motorcycle wreck years ago. Went to the hospital, literally the emergency room was there for less than 6 hours. And the total bill was $27,000. They charged you for everything. I was looking at the bill, and there's this item on the bill. They give you this. I mean, luckily I had insurance, right? That's going to pay for this. There's an item on the bill like cough support device. Now this sounds like, first of all, I didn't come in for a cough. This sounds terribly important, doesn't it? Cough support device. You know what that is? It's a pillow that they give you so that you can hug it when you cough and feel better. No. Right? So like these other benefits like health insurance are important. You're going to want to look at these kinds of things. That's part of work. It's not just the wages. It's also things like health. What happens if you have a stroke and can't work? If you go blind, I mean, for me, almost everything I do requires lots of good vision. Being a college professor requires that I read a lot. I need to be able to see. Being an attorney requires that I read and write a lot. Actually, being a college professor requires that I write a lot. Written 2 textbooks, 13 articles, write a lot, important. I'm a licensed commercial pilot, important that I see. Takeoff is optional. Landing is not. Requires good vision, depth perception, so that you don't smack that plane down on the runway. I have to fly commercial this Friday to take our sales team. I'm horrified. I'm like, they always smack the plane down on the runway. Why did you go to pilot school? I'm also a little terrified because we're engaged in a armed conflict, not a war. It's not a war, folks, because Congress declares war. Has Congress declared war? No, we are engaged in a police exercise. Think we might be a target? I'm a little concerned. Flying into the busiest airport in the world, you know, Atlanta. A little paranoid. So disability, leave. Most of us need time off to recharge. Is that going to be paid for? So these instrumental things are important. And all of these things have ethical import as well. A lot of it has to deal with your worth. Being paid what you're worth. That's a big topic. So Mika Brzezinski has this thing, know your worth, as part of a program that she does about know what you're worth. Know how much you should negotiate for, right? These are all important. More important though, and more critical even than these things when it comes to wages, like we want to be paid a fair wage for our work. What is a fair wage? Well, that depends on what your skill level is. I have a friend who works for Loves Corporation. He works in their IT department. He's been doing this for a long time. And he has these guys that work for him that are all younger, and they want to know why he makes more money than they do. Well, he's been doing this for 40 years. You know, maybe makes him a little more valuable than other people, right? But more important are the psychic goods that we get. That's probably a good place to stop. I have a meeting that I'm gonna have to go to at noon. So if you feel cheated by this, you let me know and we'll stay late on Thursday. We'll finish this up. And then next week is the second exam, which you will have all week to complete. So we actually won't see each other for 2 weeks after Thursday, because the following week, you're welcome to come. I will be in Dillon, Colorado skiing that week, because I think if I looked correctly, that is spring break, right? If you got ducks, come see me, and we will finish this on Thursday.